Hello, and welcome to my Modlist showcase, where I give an overview and opinion on mod lists to help find the right one for you. The tone of Skyrim's world plays a big part in making it an incredible place to explore. There's the classic Nordic architecture, the snowy pine forests, and large inhabitants with their chiseled jaws. It's an aesthetic that's incredibly appealing, and so the Nordic Souls mod list leans even further into this theme, while also including new gameplay and quest overhauls on top, creating a balanced modded experience. So, Nordic Souls is created by Jaborgen and released for Skyrim Anniversary Edition, and the version I've been playing on is version 2.3.2, released on the 28th of January 2024, although as of recording this a new version has just released. As for what Nordic Souls is, it's described as a comprehensive visual and gameplay overhaul designed to freshen up and streamline the game while staying true to Skyrim's Nordic theme. It provides a lot of lore-friendly content in the form of new quests, loot, a complete Simon Rim gameplay overhaul, and beautiful yet performance-friendly visuals. Nordic Souls is downloaded and installed using the Wabberjack Modlist installer, with a handy guide found on the list's GitHub. I also just made a video which talks through any problems with Wabberjack that you might encounter, so you know, it's there if you need it. Anyway, the install size is around 180GB, not including Skyrim itself and the downloaded mods, which you can delete after it's complete. And once installed, the mod organizer has a few optional tweaks for ultra-wide support, controller support, performance presets, and different ENB presets. The specifics of the performance and ENB stuff I'll cover in the next section. Skyrim All-in-One is combined with a number of texture mods that I could go on and on listing off, but overall it definitely feels true to vanilla. For example, you have new rustic building textures, but they don't look overly clean. The Nordic tone definitely comes across from the small props and architecture scattered around from mods like Luxvia and Spaghetti's Town and Cities. More shields, flags, wooden structures, and stone ruins all come together to serve the theme, and it feels like the kind of set dressing Skyrim would believably have if it didn't release over a decade ago. As for vegetation, Folkvanga and Vadobrom's regions coat the landscape in dense and detailed grasses, while managing to keep a surprising amount of performance, although unfortunately that's partly because there's no grass LODs, so you got the usual Skyrim pop-in. And you have happy little trees improving the forests, which you can't really go wrong with, and you have the Lux mods modernising interior and exterior lighting, while Obsidian Weathers and Seasons adds changing weathers depending on the time of year, including a more detailed fog that adds to that cold Nordic feeling. If you want to take lighting a step further, the optional mod section has EVLAS, which improves Skyrim's volumetric lighting and shadows by synchronising them with Skyrim's sun and moon, although it comes with a notable hit to performance, which is why it's off by default. As for NPCs, this list has definitely kept to improving their vanilla look, though the new hair and skin does give them a cleaner and shinier style. Now we get to ENBs and performance. So by default, Rudy ENB is used, which is what you've been seeing in the footage. But if you follow the install guide, you can use the Colornated ENB, Ominous ENB, Paicho ENB, or just turn the ENB off altogether. Obviously it's all down to personal preference, but do remember that performance can vary for each one. So say you turn on Paicho for example, I'd recommend hopping around the map to test your frame rate before committing to it. Although luckily, the performance is pretty great by default, so higher end systems have a lot of wiggle room when it comes to ENB choice. Looking at the list in its default state, I usually held 60 FPS no matter where I was, although it did sometimes dip in cities, but even then it stuck above 50. And with bugs, I encountered none, and I didn't encounter any crashes, although I've seen some people complain about them, which is actually why the list just got a new update, as the mod author is well aware and they're addressing the crashes already, so you know, by the time you watch this, it might not be a problem. The Nordic Souls guide reiterates a few times that this list is indeed a big overhaul, modernising Skyrim's gameplay, but it's not one of those lists that turn it into Dark Souls or The Witcher and so on. It certainly takes inspiration from those games, but the goal isn't to be exactly like them. And summing that up perfectly is the Simon Magus mods included, which are so impressive that it feels like they're the core of the vast majority of lists I look at. I'll quickly sum it up because I've spoken about them so many times. You have balances to perks and powerful new ones to improve build variety. There's new standing stone effects, racial abilities, enchantments, alchemy recipes, improvements to vampire and werewolves, improvements to shouts, a religious worship system, and I could go on and on. The main thing is that they improve Skyrim's existing gameplay, but in a way that feels natural, without feeling the need to read a guide on how it all works. Moving on, there's some customization when it comes to leveling. As while default values are set by default, you can choose to tweak the leveling freedom mod, and adjust how frequently you level as you go from early game to late game. There's also dynamic weather and time-based detection, which adjusts NPC sight and detection range depending on the weather and time of day. The Huntsman mod adds hunting items to catch new animals, offering new food recipes. The Brewer mod adds a new alcohol brewing mechanic. The Silgarrot mod lets you learn words of power from killing dragons. Press H to horse provides new saddles, armour, and quality of life features like horse inventory. There's the new Starfrost mod for survival, bringing a new injury system where each attack from the enemy has a slight chance of it injuring you and reducing your maximum health. And if you don't rest and recover from these injuries, they can turn into infections, affecting health regen. It also brings a plethora of tweaks to all the usual survival mechanics like warmth and hunger, so if you plan on playing survival mode, it's probably worth reading on the Mods Nexus page. And finally there's Conduit, adding a new system for infusing items with spells, separate from the normal enchantments. So, for example, say you have a sword in one hand and the flame spell in the other, you can infuse the sword with flames to give it a unique fire effect for 20 seconds. And as you can imagine, there's a ton of uses for this, and it really opens up build variety. Especially if you think outside the box, as it's not only used for dealing extra damage, but also for healing and more movement options. Sticking with the Simon Magus mods, there's a new hand-to-hand combat perk tree for those who like to punch their problems in the face. There's also bard perks under the speech skill tree, allowing you to play songs for a temporary buff. And the Dragon Cult mod adds a Dragon Priest skill tree for controlling dragons. As for the main combat overhaul, Blade and Blunt is used to place an emphasis on resource management, so health, stamina and magicka regeneration is slower, while most actions use up more of their related resource. Although attacking, blocking and staggering all at the right time is far more impactful. And there's a bunch more this mod does to staggering, resistances, movement speed and so on. Plus it pairs naturally with the injuries added with the Starfrost survival mod. Next we have Precision, adding hit reactions and recoil depending on what you strike. And with the Precision Creatures mod on top, all these changes are added to certain creatures, along with some improved hitboxes. Looking at enemies specifically, Draugrs have more abilities, and Alduin himself is buffed while the other Dragon Priests are alive. There's also entirely new enemies, such as Bandit Spell Swords, Bogmort Swamp Creatures, Minotaurs, Ogres, and powerful new Spriggans. When it comes to where these enemies will spawn, the mod's arena and locational... Oh, hello. Kitten has joined. The mod's arena and locational encounter zones make sure things are kept balanced with better level scaling, and making sure enemies guarding a location are the same level as the ones inside. And finally, True Directional Movement modernises third-person movement, while TK Dodge adds a simple sidestep mechanic. The amount of new content is where I find this list really shines. You have highly praised quest mods like The Forgotten City, Clockwork, Worm's Tooth, Heart of the Reach, Unslad and much more, adding hundreds of hours of new content in new lands that are incredible to explore, and that's on top of all the Creation Club quests. And I appreciate that these quest mods haven't just been slapped on and forgotten about. Take the huge Vigilant quest for example. There's 17 other mods included that improve its textures, voice work, balancing and so on, so all these new quests work seamlessly as possible. Plus you got the Missives mod and interesting NPCs adding a bunch of smaller miscellaneous quests on top. And you can't forget the quests added with new followers, including Caden, Gore, Inigo, Katana, Ori and more. And finally there's vanilla quests, with the quest expansion series of mods adding more dialogue options, and unique ways to complete Skyrim's most notable plotlines. On top of the usual mods like immersive sounds and audio overhaul, there's also new sounds keeping to that Nordic theme, with most of the heavy lifting done by Yggdrasil. On top of the Celtic music it adds, it also overhauls some of the user interface sounds like levelling, crafting and location discoveries. Plus you have the Pentapox collection of mods added for combat. Have a listen for yourself. With a huge amount of quest mods, many of them come with unique new items on top, and yet still there's over 100 weapons added with heavy armoury, including halberds, spears, glaives, short swords, quarterstaffs, mauls, hatchets and clubs. You even have a ton of individual weapon mods on top, with incredibly detailed models, like the Dover Nord weapons, which obviously keep to the theme. And the armours focus on this even more so, with mods like Northern God Armour, Wind Ruler Armour and Infantry Armour, many of which leaning into that style of steel with leather cloth laid over, and horned helmets. As for spells, Mysticism overhauls a huge amount of vanilla spells, while including almost 200 of its own, many of which will be used by enemies as well. There's also the Darani collection of mods, adding new spell types like nature spells, lava spells, eldritch spells, and a ton more. Plus with the Sorcerer mod, you can now craft your own unique spell scrolls and staffs. So yeah, there's plenty for a mage to work with. For some extra points to talk about, there's a number of new player houses, like the Riverside Lodge and Dovahkiin's Vault. The More to Say mod adds new dialogue and conversations to a bunch of NPCs, and certain enemies will speak more with mods like Bandit Lines expansion. Tarnished UI provides the sleek HUD in UI, although you can swap it out for Nordic UI in the optional mods section. And the Paper Map mod is added on top, which is a personal favourite of mine. Creation Club items are better distributed across Skyrim, and some of the content has had a huge overhaul, like with the Saints and Seducers extended cut, which adds in entirely new quest lines and voices. Perk points can now be reset with a special potion. Alternate Start and New Beginnings extension gives a huge amount of choices with starting locations. Animations have been overhauled for both first and third person. Improved alternate conversation camera adds a zoom in when talking to NPCs, although I will admit I switched it off for personal preference. And finally, the Distinct Interiors mods add a ton of props and miscellaneous items inside many interiors, just to make them seem more lived in. I get plenty of people asking me stuff like, what's the best mod list for combat, the best for new quests, and so on. Honestly, most of the time, people tell me they aren't looking for anything hyper-specific, they simply want to play a modded Skyrim with improved gameplay, better graphics and more content. And in that case, this is one of the easiest lists to recommend. You want Skyrim to look great, or keep an impressive performance? It's got you covered. Want to improve and modernise Skyrim's gameplay without transforming it into something entirely new? Yep, that's all here. And you want to have many of the best and largest quest mods included, so a single playthrough could last hundreds, if not over 1,000 hours? Again, Nordic Souls has it. But of course it's not enough to have a bunch of mods thrown into a pot together, as you want them to all fit seamlessly and work in tandem as if it was always intended that way. And that's part of what stood out to me of this list, as there was never a part where I felt like a mod was out of place, or like I'm missing something without reading a Nexus mod page. Now of course, if you want an epic power fantasy, hardcore survival or anything like that, this probably isn't what you're looking for, but if you want a balanced Skyrim experience that offers a ton of new quests and improved gameplay, while still managing to stick to what made Skyrim special, then Nordic Souls is a great list to try out. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate it if you gave it a like, as it does help the channel grow. And of course, a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters, Gorthan, Sodoomy, Gavin Van Buren, Connor Peterson, Esteban, John Ratz, Ter Aura, Jaden Shaw, Jake Carlo, Alec Bentley, Jack Ma and Christian Howell. Every one of these contributions means so much to me. It means I'm able to dedicate a lot of time to this channel, and you know, just keeps the content flowing, so thank you so much. And yeah, thank you everyone, and farewell.